What's up, guys? Welcome back to OverTakes. This is Misfit, and today we are doing our Week 10 preview, the last week of qualifiers for the Midseason Madness tournament. We're going to talk about all the playoff scenarios for teams getting in. Most of it's pretty well set in the West, and the East is we're still got two teams that have a chance to get in. So we're going to talk about that stuff, and then we're going to hit teams and players I'm watching this week, and then we're going to do the pick'ems for Week 10. Okay, before we get into all this, though, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me. Thank you very much for all your support. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. If you're new, thanks for stopping by. I do Overwatch League content 2 to 3 times a week, depending on what's going on. And let's hit this. All right, so we got a lot to talk about as far as Week 10 in the Overwatch League. It's the last week of qualifiers for Midseason Madness tournament. So let's talk first about the standings. We'll get that out of the way, and then we'll dive into the matches and whatnot and what have you for that. So the West is pretty well set. Talked a little bit about it on the recap, but all 8 teams are set. We're just waiting on seeding as far as the tournament goes. There's still some scenarios where teams can move up and down. It's still up in the air in the West. The East, we still have 2 teams that have a shot of getting in or getting knocked out. We have Chengdu on the outside looking in right now, and Philadelphia, who is holding on to the last spot in the East for the tournament. So Philly got locked out, and they have a worse record than Chengdu, but they did so well in the tournament last time that they have 6 league points. Chengdu has 5. So Philly's sitting at 4-6 on the season, and Chengdu's sitting at 5-5. Chengdu has the Dragons and the Spark this week. Philadelphia has the Charge and the Dynasty. What needs to happen for Chengdu to get in is they have to win both games. Unless Philadelphia really shits the bed and loses both games, and they still only have to get 1. Tough task for Chengdu, playing 2 of the better teams in the region this week in Hangzhou and Shanghai. Hangzhou's looking shaky at best. They're Changgooning right now with the Architect at flex support and all the other scenarios that are going on with them. Shanghai looks dangerous right now. This is the best Overwatch they've played all year long in the last couple of weeks, and they turned it around pretty fast. It was put Fade in on ball and see what happens. That's the way it felt to me. And let Lip and Fleta do what they do. That seemed to be the winning scenario for them. But Chengdu and Philly have the weekend where they have to pretty much sweep. Philadelphia has some leeway. They're playing Seoul on Sunday, so that's going to be a tough task for Philly. Seoul is playing out of their minds right now. They potentially, depending on what happens with the Charge, they're probably going to beat the Charge. I don't think Philly's that much in the dumpster that they're going to lose to the Charge. So you're looking at a scenario where they could lose to Seoul and be okay, because they got the extra league point, which is coming in handy right now against what they got going on with Chengdu, who's only 1 game behind, or 1 point behind, 1 game ahead in the win column, and 2 maps ahead. There is no way they could tie, I don't think, unless, I guess they tie if Philly loses both games, points-wise. And depending on what Chengdu does map-wise, well, Philly would have, at minimum, 2 more map losses if, say, they both went to map 5. So they would be a -5. Chengdu wins both, they're going to be ahead, because they'll have a +4. They have the map differential, which is going to be the tiebreaker in that scenario, as far as the way the points are. The West, there are a couple teams that can move up and down. Dallas is one of them. They're pretty solidified in the 3 spot, because there's only 2 teams that have 2 games this week. And they're not in the conversation at all. Well, I guess they kind of are, because they're playing. It's New York and Boston. They're both playing the Outlaws. So Outlaws got a kind of an easy week, so they could probably maintain where they're at, if not move up, depending on what Dallas does against the Spitfire. But even in that scenario, Dallas still would maintain if they lost, because they would have 10 points. Oh, well, Houston would be, I guess Houston also has 2 games this week. I should have said. If Houston wins both games, they would be at 10 points with Dallas, and it would come down to map differential which Houston would have to, at minimum, 3-1 both teams. They would have to. Dallas is plus 11. They're plus 7. I think they would have to 3-0 both matches to jump over Dallas. Not really a hard task when you're talking New York and Boston and how good Houston has been looking of late. Yes, they won on a C9, but they still stayed in there with Atlanta. And Atlanta's a good team, even though their record indicates otherwise. But at the top, you're not going to see much different going on here. Gladiators got Mayhem. They're most likely going to win that. They'll be still at 10-2, and San Francisco's pretty solidly locked in the top spot at 11-0. So nobody has 2 games, or they only have 1. So even if they lost, which they're not going to, because I believe they're playing someone, Toronto or somebody. So even if they lost to Toronto, they still would be ahead of the Gladiators. Even though the Gladiators are tied with them in points, the map differential is just it's plus 26 to plus 19. You can't make up 7 maps in one match. Not going to happen. So that's where the West kind of is. The middle is kind of who knows what's going to happen. A couple of games on paper, it looks like almost everything's going to stay the same. You might see London, Houston, Atlanta. Actually, not even Atlanta. Atlanta, I would say, is solidly at 6. You might see a little Houston, Dallas, London scenario where one of those teams moves up or down or something like that. But Dallas is 2 points ahead of both of them. You could see London and Houston flip-flop for the 4 and 5 spot. Atlanta's pretty solidly there. Mayhem and Toronto have the top 2 teams in the league, so those are most likely losses. If you consider the way the Mayhem and Toronto play, they beat the crappy teams 90% of the time, and then they lose to the top 5, top 6. They always lose to. Well, I guess Toronto beat Houston. So all right, a little here and there with the potentially winning, but they don't beat San Francisco, the Gladiators, Dallas. Neither of them beat London. I think we're pretty well set. Maybe minus the 4 and 5 slots if you really look at it. Dallas has the toughest match of the week. London, obviously, if they win, that puts them at 9 points. Still behind Dallas, but it might give them a little distance from Houston. But Houston has 2 matches at 8 points. And if they win both, which is most likely going to happen, playing Boston and New York, you might see Houston jump up. Most of the West hinges on the seeding, is hinging on that Dallas Spitfire game and the 2 Outlaws games. I think, I wouldn't call it a done deal, but shock beating Toronto is probably most likely scenario. Glad's most likely beating Mayhem. Like, there's a couple of matches that don't matter. I guess you could say the Atlanta-Paris match matters, but we have the worst showing of a Boston-New York experience in any sport coming up as your last game of the weekend on Sunday. That doesn't matter either. And the Titans Justice, if you're that diehard, you're going to watch this other than for the memes. I mean, we could have a good toilet bowl scenario here. Who did it worse, Justice Vancouver or New York Boston? Could be one of those weeks. It's not as confusing as it once seemed, at least once you get into looking at the schedule points. The thing that throws it off is you're looking at the record, because in your head you're thinking, you forget about the points that most of the teams got when they did the kickoff clash, when they were there. So everybody got some kind of point there. So that's where you have some of these odd point things versus record. London's at 4 with 8 points. They have an 8-3 record, but they didn't go to the tournament, so they did not get any extra points. So missing out on that last tournament could cost them a higher seed, but they're solidly locked in. So 4 seed, 5 seed, I don't think you're complaining if you're London. You weren't there last time, and you hopped way up. You're on a 5-game winning streak. You're looking good, and you got Dallas this week, and you can prove to people that you can beat another good team. Because I do think London's good. All right, now that we've talked about the scenarios, we kind of rolled over the schedule. It's a lighter schedule than normal by like a game or 2. We have a couple less. So real quick, we'll do that, and then we're going to talk teams I got my eye on, and then we'll hit the pick'ems. I was going to do a match breakdown, but I wanted to talk more about the tournament scenarios and teams and what they had to play for, whatnot and what have you. And so we're skipping key matches this week. Obviously, we're going to try and do a couple of episodes. The tournament schedule's kind of odd. So they're not playing this weekend coming up. So this weekend will be the final weekend of the qualifiers. The whole week they're off, but then they start the tournament on Monday. So Monday the 18th, the tournament will start. Just remember that, guys. So when you're looking for content or you're looking for the matches or whatever, and you're used to them starting at, like, sometimes on the tournaments they start on a Thursday, maybe a Wednesday night, however it works. But look for it Monday night. And then I haven't quite figured out a scenario to do some episodes in there, but we'll get some in there. The matches are late because we're in Hawaii, so that's kind of a good thing / bad thing. If you're a human and you work during the day on the East Coast, it's going to kind of suck. But West Coast, you're golden, I guess. But that's how it's going to have to work. You know, it would have been great if this was a live event, but okay, so let's run over the schedule really quick. We'll start in the East region. We have Guangzhou taking on Fusion, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, followed by the Dragons and the Hunters. Saturday, from the East, we have the Valiant taking on the Dynasty at 6 a.m., followed by Chengdu and Hangzhou. And then the last match of Saturday is going to be the Shanghai Dragons versus the Guangzhou Charge. Sunday, 2 matches we have on Sunday. We have the Fusion taking on the Dynasty at 6 a.m. and then followed by Hangzhou Spark versus the Valiant. Okay, to the West, Friday, everything kicks off 3 p.m. Friday. We have Houston taking on New York, followed by Toronto Defiant taking on the San Francisco Shock. And then the last match of Friday is going to be the Atlanta Reign versus the Paris Eternal. On to Saturday, starting off at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Vancouver Titans taking on the Washington Justice, followed by the Houston Outlaws versus the Boston Uprising, and finishing out Saturday is going to be the Florida Mayhem versus the Los Angeles Gladiators. So the final day of the qualifiers, Sunday, first match, the big match of the day, probably the weekend in the West, Dallas Fuel taking on the London Spitfire. And the last match of the weekend, we have the New York Excelsior taking on the Boston Uprising. It is the double point one. I don't know if they're memeing that or what, but anyway. So that's the schedule. All right, let's talk teams and players. Obviously, the teams that we're going to be watching, I'm keeping my eye on, especially in the East. There's 3 teams I want to kind of take a look at. Fusion, I want to see them come around, get things together. They've looked shaky. They have games where they look good, where they look bad. They got buried by the Dragons, and they beat the Spark 3-2. So it's hard to tell what's up with them. I want to see the DPS line get back into form like they were at the beginning of the season. It seems like they have hit and miss times where they're like hot and cold kind of thing. Belisariya doesn't look as good as I thought he was looking in the beginning. And Fury is playing okay. It's kind of mediocrity, and it's hard to figure out what they're doing. I want to see them get consistent, maybe even a consistent roster setup. There's a lot of flip-flopping in and outing with the DPS and the tanks. Sometimes if you stabilize a roster, I understand certain maps you're going to want to play certain things, especially with the tank situation right now. Outside from that, you should probably be trying to get a really solid lineup, and I think they need to do that. I'm also going to be checking out Chengdu, of course. They're both of these teams are tied together in this scenario to get into Midseason Madness. And Chengdu needs to play out of their minds, more or less, to get there. They have the task of taking on the Dragons, who are playing much, much better. Last week they showed that they're kind of getting back on track. And then they have to finish up with the Spark, who are kind of on a downturn, so that might be the opportunity for Chengdu, but they have to win both. So for them, they have to be able to get into scenarios where, and I don't know if it's going to happen against the Dragons, is kind of the point I'm going to try and make here. Teams are trying to get Jinmu out of his comfort zone because his hero pool is so small. So if you get him off the Genji area, he can't run Pharah, or you have him on Tracer. I saw him on Tracer for a minute, or Sombra. You don't want that, because Leave you don't have to worry about. You can put him on whatever, and he's going to be fine. The rest of the team, I think, is doing okay, too. It's just you're pigeonholed into these scenarios because if he can only play Genji, you have to build a whole comp around that so it functions properly. You're running Ana for a nano boost. There's a whole bunch of different things you have to do. The same thing with Pharah. You're running a Mercy, so that takes one of your ground supports away. It's just difficult to maneuver, and teams are trying to get him off of that. The good teams. The bad teams just try and let them do what they do, but they're losing to them. And even some of the not bad teams, I guess. This match is going to be the tough one for him. I think they can hang with Hangzhou. Especially right now, the way Hangzhou's playing and the way they're in and outing people. And as far as like putting in Architect and Changgun doing his magic, I guess. It's getting close to the playoffs, or the tournament. So let's just shit the bed. Let's just run garbage out there and put DPS players on. I know that the Shock did stuff like that too. But the direction is way better when it's crusty compared to this guy. But anyway, as far as his strategy and stuff go, I'm not saying his person or anything like that. So I want to keep an eye on the Hunters. Also, speaking of Changgun and the Hangzhou Spark, watching them is going to be interesting this weekend too, because we're going to see if they do more of this Architect stuff, which it's not terrible per se, but I'm not a big fan of it. Alpha Yi and Shy are playing really well. Their support line, even with Architect in there, has been suspect, and it was one of the things I was afraid of at the beginning of the year. They got to get it together, get some things just rolling before they get into this tournament, because they're just going to get smoked by the looks of it, the way they're playing right now. And if they go up against one of those teams in the West or something like that has, like, say, London or somebody like that, London's going to smash them. Whether Alpha Yi or Shy or whoever is in there. So they got to work some things out. In the West, I want to pay close attention to the London-Dallas game. More than the teams themselves, I guess. If we're going on a team scenario, I know what London's going to do. I like watching them. They're fun to watch. Dallas, are they going to be able to bring some of the stuff out that they did in the last couple weeks and make it work? Make these guys sweat a little. London, that is. Beat them, or you would like to say, if you're a Dallas fan. And get up to Dallas's form of the last year and 3/4, or year and a half, more or less, minus the last stretch here. They always slow burn at the beginning, too, of a tournament cycle when they kind of just like are figuring things out. They did it last year a couple times where they lost early and then just swept out the rest of the time. So they always do that. Anyway, is London going to be able to hang with them? I don't know. I want to get a good view of Dallas, where Fearless is when he's playing ball, or potentially Winston, and what they got Hanbin on, and how he's doing things. Occasionally they're running some weird stuff, but it's working. So you got to go with working right now. And are they flipping in too much? Who knows? It's hard to say. Like I was saying about Philly, it feels like there's guys coming in and out all the time, but you kind of got it with the tanks, especially when you get a scenario when you're going from, like a control map to King's Row, or you're going from push to escort. You're going to want to have different people in there, I guess, especially tanks. It varies from map to map now. So you can't just say, all right, you know what, unless you're Soul or a team with only one tank, you're not doing we're just going to play ball the whole game. I mean, it's not 2019 Chengdu, or 2020 Chengdu, or 2021 Chengdu. Anyway, you see where I'm going. But keeping an eye on the fuel and seeing if they got the wheels turning, they've gotten this thing straightened out. And not really because of how good the matches are going to be, or necessarily the team. I want to keep an eye on Houston and see if they take care of business against New York and Boston, because that'll also give us a picture of what's going to happen later in the week. If New York is actually better, if Houston goes in there and 3-0s them, is Dallas bad, and is Dallas in trouble? Because they almost got beat by New York. But I think Houston is kind of just right outside of that top 4 right now, too. I consider Atlanta up there ahead of them. I know they beat them last week. What I'm saying is, in my mind, I think Atlanta is a better team. Their record definitely doesn't show it. Yeah, they could be 7-4, one game off of Houston. I think Houston is just like Houston. You can even throw Atlanta in there too. They could beat these teams that are above them. Dallas, San Francisco, Gladiators. Dallas is certainly vulnerable right now. They're still at 8-3. So I think London is the anomaly in that group that's ahead of them. But Houston did beat Dallas in the first game of the year, and they did beat Atlanta last week. And we're putting beat in quotes. And they gave the Gladiators a run, too. So they're coming up a little bit more. They feel like the more this team plays together, they're just getting better and better. That play with, at the end of the Atlanta match, that was all Iris and Lastro, just maintaining that with the Boostio and all that stuff. Yeah, the C9 happened, but arguably, without those two using their heads and keeping that point alive still, we would be talking about a different scenario here right now. But the more these, like, it's adding to my point here of the more these guys play together, the better they are. I just want to see some better play from Piggy. He's starting to get into a groove a little bit, like when he's playing Sigma and stuff like that. He looks a lot better on Sigma. And a couple of the other heroes that they have him running too. He was kind of bad at first. Well, I think it's lack of playtime too. And you're not used to the other tank being gone. And also, guys, you have to understand, they can't grind rank like we can, I guess. Well, they could, but what I'm saying is they're going to want to grind ranked. If he plays Sigma or Reinhardt in ranked on ladder right now, it's pointless because it's a totally different game. And also, you add in the scenario of, okay, the beta's back up, the patch is totally different. So the only people you can play with to improve your game, and this goes for all the guys, too, is with pros, seemingly scrims, or with against your own team or people in the building. But does it benefit you to play against your coach who may be a plat? No, it doesn't. Or even a GM. You're a fucking pro. This is one of the inherent problems right now with the game, and I've been picking up on and noticing more as I've been thinking about it. There are 3 versions of the game right now. There's the beta that everybody's playing. Not everybody, the people that got in. There's Overwatch 1, which is dead. And then you have Overwatch League playing on the end patch from the May beta. So I want these guys to improve and be able to get repetitions in. So it looks like they're improving. That's why I think some of the stuff is stagnant. Like some of the, not the comps, but like people screwing up with the C9s. The C9s are all over the place because you're making mistakes. Because you're not grinding ranked. And you could say, well, C9s don't matter and you can practice in ranked. That stuff shouldn't happen. But 5v5 is different than 6v6. There's one extra body. So, all right, a little rant there on that. And I'm not saying that that's why Piggy's hadn't played well and all that. But it's understandable when you're going, how come they haven't figured this out? Some of these guys haven't figured these heroes out. It's taking longer because they only play against each other. They can't go for 4 hours and play Sojourn on ladder because it doesn't exist. So how the fuck are you supposed to get better? Shooting bots? No. Custom games? Definitely not. You get better by, and scrims, they are what they are. You only have certain blocks of time for those things anyway. You're not, Atlanta's not calling up Florida and going, hey, let's play Overwatch for the next 6 hours and practice. No, they're not doing that. You can't. So a little rant in between things is always, it's always necessary, I guess, for me to throw one in there. But I think that's why we're seeing some problems with stuff. So those are the teams I'm going to keep my eye on. Dallas and that match, the Dallas-London match. Also in the East, Hangzhou, see if they're Changgooning. And then we have Philly and Chengdu battling it out for that last spot and seeing what they're going to be able to come up with. And a lot of it hinges on the matches that they got to play, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun weekend. So let's talk a couple players I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be watching for Architect. No, not really. Maybe he's going to play tank this week. Players I want to watch and see what they do and that kind of thing. This is more of my fun thing, not for I'm concerned about, or I just want to watch. These are the guys I'm going to watch because they're absolutely fabulous to watch and they're insane. Today I'm going to say not necessarily a bunch of different players, but people playing Sojourn is my thing this weekend. I want to see if Kai can just go absolutely ham on Paris and just absolutely destroy them. I want to see if he can get, because there was one point where someone was saying, I believe it was Avril, that one of the matches, he was at like a 70% railgun rate as far as accuracy. That's nuts. It's absolutely insane. And Merit, same thing. He's got 2 matches against weak teams. I want to see how he does with that, too. It's just fun to watch, and I can't wait to watch it. So those are kind of my players. I know it was quick, and it was kind of a lumping a bunch of guys together. I'm watching the Sojourn play is my theme for the week. I want to see that. Obviously, watching the entirety of the matches, but just watching people play Sojourn. That's why I'm bummed that we can't have the replay viewer right now because of all the inner workings with the game. And there's another tool that these guys really don't have either, unless they have a special one for the league, watching replays. Because that was my bread and butter when I would break down matches or teams or things like that, was going to the replay viewer and going, why did this fail? And you put on X player's perspective and you see, I'm like, oh, okay, this is why. Don't get any of that. But yeah, those are my players. All right, let's hit my pick'ems. Last week, we had a big rebound, guys. Big rebound last week. I lost 2 matches out of the 16. I went 14-2. If I had some semblance of a brain the week before, it would have been a little bit better. Yeah, and I was a C9 away from being only 1 loss. So, and you know which C9 that was. So I'm pretty psyched about my results from last week. Way better than I have done in the previous weeks in this tournament cycle. So we're turning it around. Getting ready for the tournament, and we're going to try and call as much of it as we can, and get as much of it as we can right. Well, we'll see what happens when we get there. But let's do the pick'ems for this week. We're going to start in the East, of course. So East region, pick'ems, here we go. Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Guangzhou Charge. I have Philly 3-0. Next up, after that, we have the Shanghai Dragons versus the Chengdu Hunters. I have Shanghai ending Chengdu's hopes to get into the tournament 3-2. Saturday in East, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Seoul takes on the Valiant. I have the Seoul Dynasty winning 3-1, followed by the Chengdu Hunters taking on the Hangzhou Spark. I have Chengdu winning 3-1. Last match of Saturday, Shanghai Dragons versus Guangzhou Charge. Shanghai 3-0. Sunday, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Seoul Dynasty taking on Philly Fusion. I have Seoul winning 3-1. And the final game from the East for the qualifiers for the Midseason Madness, we have the Hangzhou Spark taking on the Valiant. I have Hangzhou winning 3-2. Okay, to the West. Kicking it off on Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Houston taking on New York. I have Houston 3-0. Next up, Toronto taking on the San Francisco Shock. I have the Shock winning 3-0. Final match of Friday. We have the Atlanta Reign versus the Paris Eternal. I have Atlanta winning 3-1. Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Washington Justice taking on the Vancouver Titans. I have Washington winning 3-2. Wouldn't be surprised if Vancouver could pull off a miracle here, but we'll see. Next match, Houston Outlaws versus the Boston Uprising. I have Houston winning 3-1. Final match is Saturday. Florida Mayhem versus Los Angeles Gladiators. I have Gladiators winning 3-0. On to Sunday. First match of Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. London Spitfire versus the Dallas Fuel. I have London winning 3-2. And the final match in the West for the Midseason Madness qualifiers, we have the Boston Uprising taking on the New York Excelsior. And another shit bowl. So I'm taking Boston 3-2. A rarity, I'm going to take a Boston team over a New York team in anything. But this is a coin flip, and I flipped it, and I'm like, it's going to be 3-2 either way, and the coin went to Boston. So I didn't really theoretically pick Boston on purpose. It's the coin's fault. Anyway, those are my pick'ems, guys. Like I said, we're looking good right now. Hopefully we get back on track again and pick up some more wins and climb up the ladder a little bit. I dropped way down to, I think I'm in the 2,500 range now, and I was at like 329, I think, at one point. Guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks a lot for joining me. All your support's greatly appreciated. And just one note, there's potential of me not being able to get up a recap episode on Monday. Like I was discussing before, I have a new PC coming. It's coming Monday afternoon. So I'm going to try and get everything done on my old gear, get it loaded up and get it up there. If my programs start crashing again like they normally do in the middle of stuff and it gets delayed, I apologize, but I will get one up as soon as I possibly can. And also same thing with the tournament preview. We're going to get that rolling as soon as we can. I'm going to have a new setup faster times I can get my stuff back on track to where like we had them earlier in the season where I was uploading at, specific times and all that stuff. So it'll be a lot more controlled. Anyway, that being said, thank you again for all your support. And if you're new and you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you very much. If you could hit a like, hit a subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, that would be fantastic. This is Misfit. I'm out. Everybody stay safe, have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you on the next one.